All right, how's that? Do we have sound now? You guys let me know if we have sound. Did we have the music sound? Start the lip syncing. Let me know if you guys can hear me. I hope you can. I am audio should be good now. Are you hearing me? Radio Tokyo. It normally goes a little bit better than this. Okay, thank goodness. All right. So we have sound now. Great. Yeah, I've been sweating this working properly all night, and so I apologize for little hiccups every now and again. Big thanks to Graph Paper Architect once again for helping me get the streaming stuff sorted. I'm just going to jump right into it, everybody. We have an incredible guest on tonight. You saw it on the title card. Um, but let me just say this: in our hobby, in our hobby, very few people get the appellation creator, foundational individual, founder. I've been lucky enough to get to talk to a few of them. Gary Gygax, James Ward. I met Dave Arneson. Sadly, I never got a chance to interview Dave. And those august folks have passed on. They've gone on to the next level. Um, but my guest tonight is one of the last men standing, one of the last people who was there. It's his fingerprints that are on original Dungeons and Dragons and advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So it is with no small amount of respect and happiness that I welcome to this live stream tonight one of the great creators. He is an author, a creator, a designer. Everyone, please welcome Rob KUNTZ. Rob, are you with us? I see your window. It's connecting to his audio. We are waiting. Not the best of connections, so hopefully Rob will be along here in just a moment. It's not me this time, I promise. I got a new pop filter tonight. You guys will have to tell me now that you can hear me how I actually sound. Let's see if I can help Rob out a little bit. See if we can unmute him and ask him to start his video there. Kabuki Kid wants to hear whipping posts. I don't know. I don't know how Rob's musical talent goes. And I know this is lagging behind some. I sincerely hope you guys can see the screen. We're just waiting. He seems to be.
You're a little choppy.
Yeah, I don't have the best connection right now, unfortunately, Rob. So I'm kind of sort of kind of doing my level best. But anyway, so audience, can you guys hear Rob?
Hello.
We've been fighting some tech problems today, Rob, unfortunately. So hoping that folks can hear you speak. How are you, sir? You're saying weather's a little hot where you are right now?
Uh, well, it's 3 a.m. in the morning, Bill. It's cooling off a little bit.
Thank goodness, and especially thank you for your
I
joining
re-
us at this insane hour. But just don't think of it as late at night. Think of it as early breakfast time. As soon as you get done, go down and have a mess of toast and scrambled eggs and OJ.
I'm a trooper, I know.
Yes, you are, sir. Yes, you are.
How
So
come how come it's harder to hear you than it was yesterday when we did the test?
I'm I'm not exactly sure. I was on my editing PC using just a boom microphone, and I have my studio mic here, and the audio settings over here are a little different. It's a little softer for recording. But I can move closer to the mic if that's a little better for you.
That's fine.
Okay.
It's just a little off, but I can get through it.
Okay. Okay.
Anyway, let's start. Hello, folks.
So I don't know if you're able to see if you're able to see the on-screen chat at all, Rob. Unfortunately, the Zoom window is not it's not putting you up. It's putting my camera up. So um but folks can hear you. Everyone seems to be able to hear you. So with all that said, for maybe for some of my viewers who don't know, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you, lots of people here know you, but just a little, give us the note card rundown.
Uh, about me now or then?
Wherever you want to start, man.
Uh, Geez, I don't know, man. I get to do a soliloquy.
Hey, you're a role player, man. Come on, you should be able to pick this up just like that, right?
Yeah, I can do that. I usually don't stand and talk about myself though. Um, Bill, you put me on a spot with that question. Where the
Uh,
hell am I supposed to go with that?
well, okay, we can
Well,
you know what?
check me a little bit.
Okay, how about this? We'll start at the beginning. Rob, you played tabletop games, war games, that sort of thing, at a time when there was no springboard of tabletop RPGs to come in from. How did you get started playing tabletop war games? How did you what was the birth of gamer Rob?
Hey, I have a strange, serendipitous tale of meeting Gary at 13 years of age. You
Okay.
know, and it was all in Avalon Hill games. But you reflect upon this stuff and you go back. I was always playing games before then.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I had mastered Stratego, and Gary couldn't beat me at Stratego, when we met. In fact, he always thought I was cheating because he couldn't beat me. So, um, I met him in '68, but I'd already been playing Milton Bradley games like Battle Cry, and there was that. What got me to meet him was searching for a dogfight game by Milton Bradley, World War I air combat. And
Okay.
way before that, I was reading all sorts of books and stuff. I was obviously on a track to be a writer to begin with because I was reading the Harvard classics when I was 9 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So when I met Gary, he saw something kind of peculiar in me, kind of precocious kid that I was already. And he kind of took me under his wing and he started teaching me all these games that I was interested in. First one was Apple Core by Avalon Hill. And it just continued with that. I mean, when I met him, he was already well in on his way in wargaming and designing miniatures rules and board games. So, then I'm introduced to chess and Japanese chess. Took me 8 months to finally beat him at Japanese chess. Everyone was like two times or two and a half times my age. And they're kind of looking around like, what's this kid doing here? Why has Gygax invited this kid? Right.
Hmm.
And about a year afterwards, they learned as I started beating them at their games. So
Nice, nice. That's excellent. So,
I was a
it,
quick learner, still am.
right
Couple
on.
of languages.
I'm sorry. What was that about languages? You broke up a bit.
Yeah, I'm not a quick learner with languages.
Mm.
My wife is, but not me.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So you and your brother, you lived in Lake Geneva at the time, and I guess as kind of uh, a young kid playing games with Gary. I mean, you were there, the basement, the sand table with all the elastilin
But
figures and
you
that
know,
sort
people
of thing.
want to people want to talk about the sand table all the time, but when I met Gary, we didn't have a sand table.
Okay, okay.
The He was play testing the ancient rules, which would become classic warfare, and they had been published in later on in War Gamers Digest, Gene McCoy's magazine first, and or a preliminary copy of them, and then they were finally published in '76 by TSR. But that's the miniatures rules that he was using at the time, using Airfix Roman figures and Britons. And that was being played on the upstairs dining room table. It wasn't until we moved to play testing tactics that the sand table was built. And then after tactics came chainmail. Just to clarify when the sand table comes in. It's not immediately there when I meet him.
Okay. Okay, so the sand table came later, and you guys were, as you say, you were upstairs and so on. So can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of chainmail? I guess since we're kind of getting on foundationally, that was Jeff Perrin and uh,
Well, Jeff was influenced by Henry Bodenstedt's
mhm,
Bodenberg. Now, Jeff worked, I've never understood whether he was actually the manager or owner of that hobby shop. What was it, Royal Hobby in Rockford?
okay.
I think he was the manager. And he was getting all sorts of, Jeff was getting all sorts of miniatures and keeping up on things. Jeff had an immense collection of books and miniatures. And and of course, he subscribed to Strategy and Tactics magazine. And Bodenstedt was out east somewhere. I forget where specifically.
Hmm.
Well, he had a hobby shop too, and he was bringing in elastilin figures that were being made in Germany. Uh, and instead of just having them for display figures, he decided to make a set of rules called the Siege of Bodenberg. And those rules were then played by him and spread throughout the United States and finally end up being serialized in issues 6 through 11, I think, of Strategy and Tactics magazine by Chris Wagner.
Okay.
And pardon me. And of course, here's Jeff at the Royal Hobby Shop in Rockford picking up elastilin figures, and he comes upon Strategy and Tactics to actually with the Siege of Oldenburg to play it. So in 1968 at Gen Con 1, um, one of Bodenstedt's um, familiars or friends from out west, because he was from the east, came to Gen Con and put on a demonstration of the Siege of Oldenburg. Gary actually played in it.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff was picking up the figures, and then within the time period right after that, and then I meet Gary. We're playing the ancient stuff, and then Jeff appears with 4 pages of rules he's written, Xerox one per side, 1 page per side of each piece of paper. And I remember exactly where we were standing in Gary's basement when he came down. I think it was around late 69 or 70. It was right in between when we were wrapping up Tractics playtest.
Mm-hmm.
And they start out as 4 pages of rules, then they go on to be serialized, well, not serialized, but published in several, uh, first as the Lake Geneva Miniatures game rules or whatever we called them in Castle and Crusade Society. That's where they ended up, I think, in issue 5.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also published, I think, in the IW, International Wargame, and Panzerfaust, from I understand. So, and it wasn't until very late in the playtest of Chainmail. Now, let's back up. The LGTSA was formed during that time period. The founding members were myself, Gary, and Don Kay.
Mm-hmm.
We were the ones actually putting up all the money for the miniatures. Gary and I bought Elastolins, and he mentions that in the Dragon magazine that him and I had collected the Elastolin figure.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until, so we had the sand table set up for Tractics. We're now playtesting Chainmail on it. And then at the end of Chainmail, when he's finishing up the Senate into Lowry, he all of a sudden comes up with these fantasy rules. They just came out of the blue, and him and I started searching dime stores for little squiggly figures and stuff to play these and converting things. Don converted some things. I'm writing about it. I'm writing a total history on this for the Castle and Crusade Society
Excellent.
and how that all starts. And that segues into that because we're now in the Castle and Crusade Society too. We're
Mm-hmm.
launching, that's pushing chainmail and medievalism. So, but these fantasy rules came out of nowhere. He had never mentioned them. And all of a sudden, we're looking for these figures. Of course, Peterson has come out and saying that some of Leonard Pat's rules for fantasy war games were in, I think, the Courier magazine. And Gary subscribed to the Courier, so he might have picked up Leonard Pat's rules because they're very similar to Chainmail. That might be the reason why they appeared out of nowhere, during the playtest, which is pretty much what, if you look at both rules, they're very similar. And but that's where chainmail comes from. When it was first published in serial in these other magazines or fanzines like the Domesday book and stuff, they were
Mm-hmm.
just miniatures rules, the medieval miniatures rules. The fantasy rules were tacked on at the last instant before they were sent in to Lowry to publish.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Now, so at this point, not at this precise point, of course, I guess I should say during this time period, This is when I'm guessing now. I one thing I've learned talking to you, Rob, I should never say I know this or I know that because you were there and you know. So,
I know a lot of things.
uh, so I'm guessing it was around this time, um, or was it before then? Was it prior to Chainmail? Was Gary starting to interact with Dave Arneson?
Gary and Dave had been interacting as IFW member
Okay.
by publishing uh, a first run of "Don't Give Up the Ship" in the IW magazine, International Wargaming.
Okay.
And then they finally met at Gen Con 2. That's when I met Dave as well. Mike Carr precedes everyone in Minnesota meeting Gary at Gen Con 1, where he has his parents driving down, and so he could actually showcase his Fight in the Skies game. That's where Mike Carr starts. And but Dave Arneson meets him at Gen Con 2, and that's when I meet Dave.
Mhm.
They knew each other as IFW members before then, had communicated by mail and stuff, and had been working on Don't Give Up the Ship, and that was published by Lowry, by Guidon Games. So that's where the connection comes. All this stuff comes from pretty much being IFW members, like I was. Right? That's where the interconnectivity comes from the IW magazine, or even you can go back a little further to the general magazine where you're putting out ads in the back as we do today for people to play with and stuff.
Mhm.
But that was in print in the back of the general magazine by Avalon Hill. So, but basically everything was being handled. Everyone gets to know each other. Jeff Perrin is an IFW member and so forth. It's the IFW brought all these people together. Yeah.
Right on. Right on. So it's right about during this time then I'm guessing that now I I know there's a lot of dispute, not I shouldn't say dispute like ugliness, but there's a lot of debate over, where the Braunstein games in the mid late 60s and that sort of thing. Did they precede D&D? Was what Dave doing, did that precede D&D? But I guess it's also around this time that you and Gary, of course, got your first look at what Dave was doing with role playing games. And what did you think about that at the time? How did that impact you?
How does what
Get,
bronze?
well, no, getting to see the the work that Dave had been doing when he was coming up with his fantasy game.
Well, I was the first one to become aware that Dave was doing something.
Really, tell us about that.
Well, it's very simple. When Gary dropped out of the Custom Crusade Society because he was full-time shoe repairman and he didn't have time to do it, and he saw that the castle it was failing because Chris Schleicher hadn't been publishing the newsletter,
Mm,
and so Gary dropped out on issue 10. And I became the publisher in issue 11. All the copyrights then were assigned from Gary to me. It's stated in issue number 11. So I tried to get Schleicher to continue publishing. He wasn't even answering my letters.
mm,
So so I decided, with the help of Dave Arneson, who I promoted to steward because that's what Gary was before he dropped out. So we didn't have a steward. So he was raised up the steward, and my brother and I using money that I got together, purchased a mimeograph to produce the last two issues of the Domesday book, 12 and 13. 14 was stenciled, but was never printed. The Facts About Blackmore article is submitted by Dave Arneson for the July issue, 1972.
Okay.
And that's where, and him and I are having a correspondence about not only miniature games, his Napoleonic game he's got going on up in the Twin Cities, but also about he sent me a letter talking about he had a Balrog playing, and it's a really weird way he couched it to me. But if you look at the how he's playing, it doesn't sound like he's playing a chainmail game, right?
Right.
And and I responded to him saying, "Well, that's weird having a Balrog. Who would trust the Balrog?" You know, I mean, you're talking a different language there. If you look at issue 13 of the Domesday book, which I'll be publishing here soon for everyone.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
Um, Number 12 and 13, you're going to be able to look at. Then I'm going to go back because everyone's interested in the fantasy aspect of it. I decided to kind of start at the ending and then go back, you know, with the issues. And pardon me. But if you look at Facts About Blackmore, it just is very different. I mean, it's not like it looks like he's organizing elves into communities. And I mean, we were not doing this in the chainmail games. Uh, I mean, yeah, you could say there were 40 elves and stuff, but they weren't sitting there having relationships with other people and digging mines underneath and doing all these other things. So it's obviously Arneson is already in the height of playtesting and doing this in the Blackmore game. We don't even know what's going on until I'm informed by that. I'm not even sure at that point until the November game occurs where they come down, and that's the demo game where the two Daves, the two Gygaxes, and the two KUNTZs are present, as I say.
Right.
So I learned of the concept at the same time Gary does. Right? And that's what starts it. So, but it would, so the indication to me of things he's already been doing and progressed upon is only in that article of Facts About Blackmore and that letter to me. Even Gary, when I called him up, he called me up and said to call my brother for the demo game because I was the LGTSA president.
Mm-hmm.
So how it worked is if somebody was going to have a game, the president got to call everyone, right? And invite him for the game. So I was, for the 6 years I was the president, I was kind of like getting everyone together with games, besides doing my other functions. But we went over there and I asked him, I said, so what's Dave McGarry, Dave Arneson, what are they bringing down? Because Gary was the Guide and games editor.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I don't know. They didn't tell me. So he didn't. So we all went flat-footed into this, right? Into the demo game. And I'm publishing in PDF, republishing very soon within the next month. The game that changed everything. If you haven't read it, you should, because that's that demo game, which I expand upon from an article I went into War Games number one, issue number one in 1977. That was called the History, D&D History, Past, Present, Future. And I start at the beginning of that demo game and brief it, but I expand the whole thing and put more torch to it in the game that changed everything. So I'm republishing that here soon. So that's how that all kind of wound up there. So it's obvious Dave's been doing this for over a year
Mhm.
previous to the demo game. Or way over a year previous to the letter. I mean to the article, and probably a year and a half by the time he unveils the demo game with McGarry leading us. No.
So did it hit you at that time that this was was it just another wargaming experience for you, albeit a unique one, or did
He
you
really read um, not only the game that changed everything, but the final part of the fourth category, where I again referenced the demo game because we were in shock silence afterwards. And I explained why in the fourth category as to why. Because understand, I've been researching this topic for 17 years and what a role-playing game is.
Mhm.
And I answered that question in the fourth category. I don't know why people don't pick up on it. I guess they want to say that it's not what it is. But you're ignoring the message or attacking the messenger in some cases, thinking I'm siding with people. But this is a fourth category of games, and that's why we're in shock because we had no model to compare it to. That's why we were silent. We had, and when and McGarry was sitting to my right at the table, and I looked at him, but I couldn't say anything. And all Dave McGarry said to me was, "Cool, huh?" So I break that all down in the fourth category upon what this game is. It is not a tabletop game. It may be played on the tabletop. It is a conceptual system. 90% of it is conceptual, Bill. So
Right.
imagine, read the fourth category.
Well, I intend to. You don't have to tell me again. And I mean, I will shout it from the rooftops as soon as I read it. You guys out there, you should definitely check that out. And by the way, some folks are asking questions. I'm not using StreamYard tonight, guys, so I'm kind of trying to cull your questions as best I can. And I will be bouncing those off of Rob just as quick as I can.
Yeah, I answered some questions. Go
Okay,
ahead.
okay, sure. Um, so let's see here. All right, Kevin Lamb wants to know. He said recently
Kevin,
you. I'm sorry,
Kevin,
Kevin.
wait.
Recently you reminded us that it was you who first suggested different hit dice based on class for D&D. Was variable weapon and monster damage also you?
Um, could you restate that?
Sure. So Kevin is wondering. He says you were the one who first suggested different hit dice based
Right.
on class for D&D. Was variable weapon damage like a D4 for a dagger, a D8 for a longsword, that sort of thing. And different monster damage, 1d4 twice or 3d6 for a nasty bite or something like that. Was that your invention as well?
No, no, nope. That's
Alrighty.
that's straight gradation according to what you would assume in an abstract sense that Gary used for measuring what would be a damage, like a two-handed sword would do more damage, or a battle axe, or a two-handed or a pike or something. Same thing with everything. And that's all. That's all Gary. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Alan Canning asks, what do you mean by fourth category of game?
Well, this is going to cover some of what I wrote in the fourth category.
Ah, okay.
Uh, we were playtesting the game, as you know. After we got going, Gary created the first few levels of Castle Greyhawk to use as the playtest.
Mm-hmm.
About 3 weeks after him doing that, I created Castle Roger K, this first level, to start DMing him. So we were able to switch perspectives. I was playing, he was DMing. Now I was DMing and he was playing. So the importance of that cannot be understated, because as his student, I now was able to allow him to play so he could get a player's perspective as the DM for the rules. All right.
Okay.
Very important facet of playing and everything. But a fourth category, so when we're playtesting, within, I would say, first couple of weeks, and the playtests were mostly upstairs. They're very rarely down in the basement. So I don't know why people keep on talking about that. We went down there a couple of times if you needed bigger parties. Like we had 16 people over one time, so we did it down there. But that was after the sand table was moved over. But we were upstairs in the dining room, which where a lot of these games took place. And we were finishing up a game, and Gary stopped. We were standing about the same place where Gary was sitting when he said cool to me at the
Mm-hmm.
dining room table. And he looked at an indistinct spot. You know how when you're thinking and you focus on an indistinct spot in space?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he kind of said, he said exactly, he says, we've created a fourth category of game. And I didn't think anything of it until he started talking about what the other three categories were at that time. And he listed them. He said there are tabletop games, chess, whatever, board games, which would include chainmail and old miniatures games and everything. The second one are parlor games, charades, 20 questions, and go down the list with that. And the third category he identified was what you would call physical or outdoor activity games, which is kind of a large and wide varied thing from childhood play games, which are called old games,
Mm-hmm.
and on up to physical competition sports, which would also include Boy Scouts games, Scouts games, and stuff like that, which there are many of. And so he described the three categories that the counterpoint against him saying that. Now it didn't. That whole thing disappeared. I didn't think about it until 2007 when I started researching why the two editions seem to be the OD&D and then the filtering in the first edition seem to be separating apart from each other. And I described that in the fourth category as well, what prompted me to start my research on this. And then I backtrack to him saying that, and it all made sense that this is a new fourth category of games. Now, if you read the fourth category, it'll make sense why I'm making that claim. And because I couldn't sit here and describe it for hours. So that's where it comes from. And what it is a conceptual game system. So what you have is D&D as the first entry in the conceptual systems for play, adult systems for play. The biggest corollary to this, but it's not exact, is childhood play, open systems, and childhood play. When you go out there and say, I go to the moon, or I'm an Indian, or I'm a cowboy, I'm a this, I'm a cop, and I'm a robber, and this happens, I just killed you. Well, the only real difference between childhood play and what we do is that, one, we attach possibilities and probabilities to it. And that's the only thing that differs between conceptual systems of kids and adults playing RPGs. That, and we utilize adult knowledge, and whereas they don't. And in a lot of cases, our imaginary realms that we create and conceptual things that are happening in them, like, let's be honest here. We play in imaginary realms with imaginary characters that produce imaginary results, right? And we organize this in such a way, which is explained in the fourth category, that you access a mechanical system that tells you what the conceptual system cannot tell you. That is the only time you reference a mechanical system, is when the conceptual system hands off to it for the answer. But 90% of what we do in this game is not related at all to mechanics. It's by making decisions and going places. And they're all conceptual, imaginary places and beings and results.
Okay.
So that's where that comes from.
Well, there you
And
go.
my research of 17 years, there is no direct corollary to a game of this type in the history of games.
Well, there you go, Alan. That hopefully answers your question. Vincent Notabartolo is wondering, are you doing currently? I guess this would be, but are you are you doing any writing for Blackmore?
Pardon me? What was it?
Vincent is asking if you're doing any writing for Blackmore, anything set therein.
Yes, I've written the adventure Into the Wild Blue Yonder, which is a historic. It's a combination because it's a send up to Dave and the Blackmore bunch, as well as an adventure. But it's a special adventure. It should be viewed as my thank you to Dave for what he accomplished,
Excellent.
and for our friendship, and how, I write a very special preface and an afterword, and afterward, which is very special, as well as give you the adventure that utilizes part of Arneson's lore in the Blackmore campaign. and kind of expands on it and kind of ends it, so to speak. So it's a very special module, and I'm publishing that. I guess the Fellowship of the Thing will be publishing that after the convention. They couldn't get it for the convention, even though I'll be playtesting it. I'll be playing it, excuse me, at the convention in 3 sessions. And I might do more work with them. That there's been some discussion on that. We're doing more Blackmore.
Right on. Right on.
You
So
go into the Dark Realm, which is the land of the dead in the adventure.
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So there's one for you to look forward to, for all of us to look forward to, really.
So,
Vincent.
if anybody's followed my design, I've always tried to keep newness and uncertainty at the forefront of my modules, this adventure design.
Mhm.
And that's usually done by creating all new stuff so that you don't look in the book and say, oh, I know what an ogre is. I know what this is. This goes back to the beginning of when we first started playtesting D&D. And we didn't know about any of these things like the black pudding crawling up our leg in the first couple of adventures. We're chopping on it. Well, he didn't say it was a black pudding. He just described it. We'd never run into it.
Right.
So we started chopping on it. And it started coming into little pieces, crawling all up our legs in many pieces now. So we ran screaming from that thing. But
I can imagine.
that was the first black pudding. So yeah, that's what I want to keep there. I want everything to be new, whether it's the tactical situations, the NPCs, the magic items, the spells, the monster, the situation. So that's what you're going to get by going into the Dark Realm. It's my take on the realm of the dead, right? And it's a pretty scary fucking one, you know.
Well, I'm looking forward to that one. I like a little bit of horror mixed in with my D&D. Um, so now everybody out there in the audience, I've seen your questions come up. Don't worry, we'll get to those. But I do want to kind of shift back historically a little bit. So you and Gary had this wow moments with being shown this.
Say
So
that again, Bill. I'm sorry. Uh,
no, that's okay. That's okay. So you and Gary, you kind of had this wow moment when you realized what the two Daves were showing you. Like you said, pretty neat, huh? Um, so did you two guys did you expect did that when you started producing Dungeons and Dragons, did you expect it to really like that? It seems like you were kind of poised and you realized what a revolutionary thing that it could be.
you were asking whether I had indications of that, or
Yeah, did you think that D&D was going to blow up like it did?
no, we had no idea. You know, let's start with Arneson
Okay.
and his group. They spent a year and a half doing this, and they thought this thing was so freaking cool and so fucking unique that they didn't even know what to name it. By the time it got down, they had no name for it. And about the time we got it, we couldn't come up with a name for it. We called it FRP. It's because there's nothing to compare it to, Bill. There is no game model in existence before this game. It is its own start point. All right. This is why it's a fourth category. And that's another indication. We didn't know what the hell to name this thing. And that's a big indication that, hey, this is something extraordinary.
Mhm.
Now, every person who came in contact with Arneson's uh, game, including us, was mesmerized by, was blown out of the water. And it was the same thing with us. We sat in stunned silence after the demo. This is not ordinary, though, as I describe in the fourth category. Usually, because we had hosted many other games, Perrin's, Tony Morales games. We can go. I can go on. Game designers came from New York to the LGTSA to throw down their game on the table and have us play test it. And usually, after you're done, you have commentary. You say, this and that and this and that. Well, of course, the worst thing they want to hear is something like this, that, hey, it kind of reminds me of playing Monopoly, you know?
Mhm.
Uh, and you would see the blood run out of the face in the play test because you don't want to sell something that's already out there, right? You're trying to create a unique thing. But we didn't have any commentary on this after the play test. There was none. And I'll tell you why. It's because we had no model to compare it to. There was no existing model to compare it to say, well, no, it kind of plays like this or it's kind of like that. It played totally unlike anything you'd ever run into. So, uh, but it was exciting and it worked. I mean, we went through all three of we went into as I described in the game that changed everything. We go into we experience everything you can experience in D&D, a town adventure, a
Mhm.
castle adventure, and an outdoor adventure. So that's all Arneson. He had that construct down, right?
Mhm.
So and but he just believed in it. But this is how crazy it got, Bill. Um, we were playing as the LGTSA. We were playing one game a week. Now, because I was so close to the Gygax family, and I was Gary's student and almost adopted son. Uh, Gary would get married to agree to teach me more about games, right? As a student. So
Okay.
I could buy with a couple of extra games playing with Gary during the week, but the LGTSA only held one game a week over at Gary's house or at mine occasionally. But when we started playtesting this game, we were playing it 3 times a day. That's like 20 times a week. And finally, this is how excited we were about it. And finally, Mary Gygax, after the first couple of weeks, blew a gasket.
I imagine.
And I relate that in one of the stories when Gary and I were and Ernie were playing in Gary's den. But yeah, this thing we had no idea it was going to work, but we were certainly pursuing it. Like we enjoyed the hell out of it. We wanted to get it done, but it was all on the feeling that this, or like Arneson and his group had already said, "Hey, this was interesting enough to bring down to Gary to see if Don Lowry would publish it." Because that's what the demo game was about, was to publish it through Lowry, because Gary was the games editor. So, but Lowry turned it down respectfully. Then they tried, when Gary finished the manuscript, he sent it off to Avalon Hill and they rejected it, kind of like laughing at, you know,
Yeah,
kind of.
I've heard about that. Yeah.
And and they weren't laughing later
Yeah.
as they get mowed under by it. They then went from laughing, ridiculing it, to attacking it and attacking TSR. That's what my article my the first short story published, first fiction published by TSR was in the Strategic Review, and that was my fiction piece. Quest for the Vermilion Volume, that's a satirical piece which attacks Avalon Hill and SBI. If you read it, and you will see that it's a satire based upon this whole convention kerfluffle and them not liking us because we're beating them in the market. So I wrote a satirical piece on it. And people to this day can't even figure it out that when it says spy, I'm talking about SPI. And when I say Avalon of the heck of the Greenwood is referring to Don Greenwood at Avalon Hill, you know. So so no, we didn't know this thing was going to take off. And people, when they got a hold of it, they looked at it and they couldn't recognize it either. I'll tell you why. Because there was no model. It's the same reason we were sitting blown away by it and not being able to have any commentary. When we sent it off to them, they looked at it and said, we don't recognize this thing. It's not going to sell. That's where the market was at. The market was at these games that were recognizable, linear, repeatable games, and no model of this sort existed. Thus, they looked at it and said, we don't understand this. Doesn't match any of the models that's making money in the market. Guess we won't do anything with it. Ha ha. And this is what happened. And that's I put that in. That's also in the fourth category. It's a very comprehensive uh, work from beginning to end.
Well, I'm definitely looking and digging into it. And I changed filters, by the way. I hope I'm not as harsh sounding now, but at any rate, uh, one of our fans here, Kabuki Kid, wants to know, do you still have any of your gaming goodies from back in those days?
My game goodies.
Yeah, yeah, a copy of original D&Ds and
Oh, no,
Dome, Domesday books, anything like that?
some of those were stolen from me. I sold some of them, and I don't have much left back in the day other than my intellectual property, you know. But not anything. Especially when I had to. I have a few bits and pieces left with Paul Sternberg, who's still holding on to my possessions because I didn't want him shipped back over here. It was too many books when I came to France, and we don't have enough space, even though it's a large house. There's no bookshelf space here. So and so I just decided not to have some of my stuff shipped over. There's a few things left, but no, none of the games and stuff.
Hmm. Okay. Let's see. Graph
I
paper. I'm sorry.
but
Go ahead.
Robillard has been quite a nomad, you know. So
Right. Kind of a wanderer, as the great song says. Let's see. Graph Paper Architect asks, what was your first character you ever ran? What was the first character?
Robillard.
Robilar. So Robilar is not just a wanderer, he's a survivor. Um,
Yeah,
that's
it's funny because it's somewhat poetic in the sense that Robillard gets his if you read the Return of Robillard, and I have the sacking of the Temple of Elemental Evil in it, which
Mhm.
I count my whole adventure there, and then the sacking of his castle and him then taking off, and how that whole story came about on Gary being snowed in, and how Tim Kask and I ended up out there playing the game. But I go, that's about 3,000 more words about the other nuances and a little bit of history as well about TSR. But the he loses his castle, which I describe, and but I still have this orb, and I've let Zugmoy out, right?
Right.
And I describe the whole interaction between myself and Zugmoy, and and she said that if I ever wanted to meet with her again, just to get in contact with one of her priests. Well, when I go to research into that, after Gary sacks my castle, trying to be nice because he really wasn't, he really crossed the line of being a DM, a neutral DM with that. It was a revenge thing, which is why I abandoned the castle because he was going to kill me, you know, and whether he rolled the right dice or not, and for me sacking the Temple of Elemental Evil. So, but he kind of cooled off and noticed he had done bad to me over the days, and he's so I started asking him questions about Silkmoy's temple, and he said it was in this place called Lynn. And I said, okay, I go to Lynn. So I start my magic carpet ride to Lynn, and that's what kind of ends Robilar's uh, sort of adventures. And but it's very strange because Lynn is France,
Hmm.
and I got a wrecked castle behind me. I'm leaving behind, and now I'm living in France as Rob, and there's a wrecked castle above me on the hill.
Well, there you go, man. Serendipity. It's just all synchronistic. I love that story, man. That is great. Um, so let's see. Dirty, excuse me, Dirty History and Hobbies asks, other than visiting the City of the Gods in 1976, did Robilar ever visit Blackmore with Arneson as DM again?
Say that again. The problem is you, your voice is being distorted.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Um,
Maybe you
other,
need, maybe you need to turn your gain down.
yeah, let me bump that down a little bit. Anyway, other than visiting the City of the Gods in 1976, did Robilar ever visit Blackmore with Dave Arneson as DM again?
Nope. Dave DM me twice, and that was during the demo and during the City of the Gods. And that's it. And same for Gary.
There you go. Let's see. Here's an interesting question. What is your opinion on modern sci-fi fantasy tabletop war games like Warhammer 40K, War Machine, that sort of thing? Or do you have an opinion about them?
I have no opinion about Warhammer because I've never played it.
Okay.
Um, the best I can give from that point of view, who asked that question, by the way?
That was I think I'm pronouncing this right, and I apologize if I'm not to the user. That was Thetan. Thetan.
Right. Well, science fiction from Gamma World or Metamorphosis Alpha. That's about my only grounding. I never played Traveler, right? And so, what do I think about the modernization of it or the lack of it, or what is it, the question again?
Oh, just wondering about your thoughts on I guess the big army miniature sci-fi games of today. Just general feeling about them.
Well, it's a theme. I mean, fantasies, sword and sorcery is a theme. Uh, I wouldn't have too many thoughts unless I played a specific type of game, um, and see if they're porting it in such a way that they intend to. You know,
Hmm.
it's kind of an ambiguous, not to put down the question, but it's ambiguous from a designer's point of view. Because in order to have a thought about how science fiction is doing in the market, I would say at this point, the players probably have a better idea of that than I would. And because it comes down to the system that you're using. And so I don't know what the systems are being. I don't know a lot about a lot of the role playing systems that are out there being used, quite honestly. And quite honestly, and not to sound like an asshole or something, I just don't care. Because if I did, I'd be a reviewer of games instead of a game designer. Because there's no way with the thousands of games out there, unless somebody pushes one in front of my noggin, that I'm going to be able to keep up with this. And it didn't used to be like that. Of course, back in the day, there weren't that many Avalon Hill games, but then when SPI came out and started producing all these games plus other magazine games, you couldn't really keep up with it, right? I mean, you'd have to subscribe and buy every game. Back then, that was really ridiculously impossible to do. To try to get like all the 100 or how many SPI games that were put out. Now look at it. It's what, thousands of board games,
Oh yeah.
thousands of playing games. No, there's no way. So if you it was more specific to design, uh, which would then be a general sort of overview of RPG systems to begin with, because really all these games are putting thematic overlays on top of the system. Then attaching that's a tank. That's an electric tank. That's a robot. But when you go down the thing, you get into the system on it and you start looking at it. All it is just distributed math, and you can call it what you want. You can shape it into whatever you want. But in order to engage it in the game, it's just distributed math, unless you come up with something else. And otherwise, that's all these things are. You push around a dragon. Well, what's a dragon? Well, it's a giant minus this, and that. So once you get down to it, when you start looking at it, I'm not doing it from a cynical point of view, but from a game designer's point of view, is this stuff is all math,
Hmm.
right? I don't care what you structure and you say the math is attached to. It's a fireball, it does fire damage, does 30 points, does electrical damage, does 30 points. It's just distributed math. So if you're still in that category of distributed math, I would say it's been beaten to death from a designer's view, and that we need to start promoting something besides linear distributed math games, which have pretty much been turned into computer games to begin with, just faster.
Yeah.
They can distribute math faster. So is it the system, the mechanical system? Because everyone sits there and focuses on the mechanical system, even though 90% of the time we're dealing with the conceptual system in play.
Hmm.
This is where these two meld, and the game in itself, you could actually take a really bad system and be a good DM and actually uh, play a good game. Or else you could be a poor DM and take a good system and destroy it. So it really comes down to a lot of nuances.
Okay. Well, thank you for your perspective on that. Um, to kind of get a little into the history, because this is actually a question that I was curious about too. But I have many questions for you, Rob. Fear not. Kabuki Kid asks, she would love to hear some the bits about the genesis of gods, demigods, and heroes from your perspective.
Well, now I talk about this a little bit in Return of Robolar,
Okay.
and specifically under that part where I'm describing Robolar releasing the 9 demigods. I'm describing that adventure where he unleashes them and lets them out. That was a playtest. I was ready to co-DM with Gary of our castle, Greyhawk 2. And but he always, just like he did with Temple of Elemental Evil, he wanted me to go into it so he could unveil his masterpieces and stuff. He always was, it's same thing with Tomb of Horrors,
Hmm.
right? That was a play test again. I was ready to co-DM, but, and Robilar was unofficially retired, except when Gary said, "Hey, Rob, why don't you test this out? You know, see, you know." So when I unleashed, so I talk about gods in the game because this is where they first really start appearing. In the Greyhawk campaign, of course, there was the Church of the Blinding Light of Faith and Saint Cuthbert, which comes from the Gnome Cache, his
Hmm.
novel, The Gnome Cache, and and Crom, which I think we allowed to be in there because of Mike Menard's character and his always quoting Crom and Mitra and trying to act I was groaning. So we brought in Crom, from Robert E. Howard's. But we really didn't know what Crom was. It never interacted, did anything. The Church of the Blinding Light of Faith, that was ripped off of, was a joke, ripped off of the Firesign Theater album. And the what's the other one I mentioned? Oh,
Cuthbert.
comes out of comes out of the beginning of the Gnome Cache, first chapter, I believe, where Dunstan comes up the road and runs into the statue of this cleric holding a club, right in the middle of the road, and that's where Saint Cuthbert is born. And in fact, two of the deities, Wastri, the hopping prophet, is born in that book as well. So the uh, so we're already dealing with the, you know, on the fringes of this. Yeah, clerics they worship gods and this and that. But now Gary introduces 9 demigods, which he wants me to go down and release because that's what he wants. That whole adventure was a setup for Robillard to release these gods. That's all it was. He wanted them released into the world. He wanted in some sort of apocalyptic battle that was going on. Gary was very theatrical. And and after, because they didn't damage. I mean, when I came into the room, that was I chose to unleash Hextor first. Or well, I didn't know his name was Hexter, but
Hmm.
the 6-armed dude. And Gary's kind of looking at me, and I'm like, hey, if I can beat him, I can probably beat anybody else, right? And of course, he chopped me to shit, and I retreated out of the room. And then they started touching all the other ones, and it turned into an apocalyptic battle, and they all go off their own different directions, right? So that's the gods. And and there was another thing. I was dealing with gods, and I was starting to deal with witches. And I described this in the house because I have a house rule on wishes.
Okay.
And I started very early, so I'm not going to give that away because I'm publishing that. But the so there was always this interest in the background. Plus, I was reading myth and mythology out of my own encyclopedias, and of course Arabian Nights out of the Harvard Classics I had read, and so this whole thing about gods was very interesting. I'd already seen Jason the Argonaut several times, right?
Right.
And I mean, there's gods manipulating the whole thing there, right? And Jason the Argonaut. So, and then so when Jim comes along, and Jim meets Gary, and Jim's not a war gamer. This is very interesting because Jim's a science fiction fantasy lover.
Okay.
And as I was posting up on X, what really grew the industry were the science fiction and fantasy fans. I would say the first one is James Ward because he meets Gary at the Lake Geneva Regional Newsstand during the winter, and he's purchasing a pile of paperback science fiction and fantasy books. And Gary goes up to him and says, "Oh, so you like that stuff?" Huh? And then they get in the conversation. This was after D&D is published.
Mm-hmm.
So, so it was during the winter, but he was student teaching across the street from where I lived at Denison Junior High School. That's how I ended up downtown at the newsstand. So, and Jim and I took to each other, but Gary was very busy writing, so I started DMing Jim all the time. I was Jim's main DM for all of his adventures from Bombadil, and he teamed up with my brother on occasion, going to Bottle City and everything like that. But Jim was very big. He liked the big picture. Jim Ward loved the big picture. He liked the risks for high stakes. He was a
Okay.
gambler, Jim was. He had a poker game every Sunday or Saturday or Sunday. And but he liked the height. So when you start his campaign, you start at 6th level. Now, Jim and I start talking about making a book on gods. This is where all starts. And recent interview with OSR Grimoire, I discussed what institutes we went to, what colleges, in our research of gods, demigods, and heroes. We went to the University of Whitewater Library, University of Madison in Milwaukee, university libraries, and to the Art Institute in Chicago for researching gods, demigods, and heroes. And even did some interlibrary loans. Like I had to do an interlibrary loan on the Finnish mythos, the Kalevala, or Lanrot. So so that's where that all starts. I mean, I know it's a long story, but it kind of gives you an idea of what we're doing with the gods, not only in literature from Gary's point of view and how it was all being brought forward out of his fiction for Greyhawk, and then Jim and I then taking it to the next level.
Well, no, I appreciate the in-depth answer there. I really do. I think there's kind of been this pat assumption of, well, we need this booklet of beings to show players that their characters, DMs, that they shouldn't let their players characters get that high level. And I always found that to be kind of a pat answer, but I thank you for sharing the
Well,
insight there.
that was editorializing by Tim Kask, not
Mm.
me. Because he wrote that this whole thing. In fact, I think this whole subject is kind of from back then needs to be addressed. I don't really care how people play their games. And this editorializing in there, which I did not approve of, I'm going to tell you right now, I didn't approve of that because there was no consensus amongst us how people should play the game. In fact, Gary had already published in 1975, just prior to that editorializing, that people wanted to play a game of Dungeons and Beavers. More power to them. But now you're getting some sort of direction from TSR what you should do in the editorial, and that's I didn't approve of that whatsoever. I just want to state first off, if I had a chance to rewrite gods, demigods, and heroes, or even deities and demigods, I would approach it a lot differently than what was just an encyclopedia, which could then maybe give this indication that they were supposed to be engaged in some attack, like I'm being accused of in the making of original Dungeons and Dragons book by culturally appropriating Vishnu and what they think you were going to do, kill him and take his sword? You know, no. Listen, before I had even talked to Jim about us doing gods, demigods, and heroes, I had created the God game model, which I had played for 3 months. And I've mentioned this in interviews, and I've mentioned it in written interviews as well as spoken in audio interviews like this. That it was the God game model came into existence because I didn't like, and I still don't like to this day, um, the idea of the corporate ladder model is what I call D&D. Start at first level, you're a peon in shipping, right? And you work up to clerical, and then after a while, you finally get up to the CEO's position, and you get a gold watch, and you retire, right?
Right.
And I like it. I call it the corporate ladder model in the book. I it replicated life too much. We, kind of like, aren't we escaping this climbing the ladder stuff? And I touched upon that in the past. So in order to get around this and retire, at least get around the idea of retiring characters, uh, I just had the corporate ladder go up straight, and then I have it T. This is the guide game model. You now go horizontally, and 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 so I had created that as these people now become champions of gods who are vying with each other because they're not being apocalyptic, right? And so you look at all these things, they finally come to apocalypse and kill each other, right? So we're in this phase where they're still meandering around like in Greece, trying to outdo each other with their champions. This is what the God game model was, so that these people wouldn't retire, can actually go off and be champions of gods. So I was thinking about gods all the time, and certainly not in the sense where you're just going to chop them and take Vishnu's sword. So um, and we never had that happen in the game anyway. I don't
Mhm.
know if anybody else killed gods, but we didn't.
I think when we were young, dumb kids in middle school back in the 1980s, my peers and I probably talked about, how cool it would be to bump off Ariok and get his spell ring or, something equally ridiculously overpowered. But I can't remember as any of our games back when I was an adolescent uh,
No
going.
one killed a god in our game. In Jim's game, it didn't happen. It didn't. I'm sure it didn't happen in Arnison's. And so this whole idea is a setup anyway. So
Well, speaking of God games and that sort of thing, uh, do you still get a lot of time to play these days, or you? Uh,
with who? I play with my wife. I'm on an island, Bill, in France. I don't speak fluent French. And I wouldn't want to play with these people around here, quite honestly. Tell you, uh, I'm in Corsica. Better look up Corsica.
Right. Yeah. Some folks had asked earlier in the chat, and I meant to actually come back to it, how you landed in Corsica. What was the course of events that brought you there? But
Yeah.
it's entirely up to you whether you want to answer that or not, Rob. I am not putting
First,
anything on you.
well, I don't mind saying it. I was researching new ethos in game design, um, more for articles on design, specifically at that time. I already had my articles on systems, and I had been coming up to speed on systems. But I was taking a look at New Ethos is a very cross-sectional book where you're looking at literature and history and this and that and the other thing, design, systems. I'm like the Renaissance man in this book. I'm covering lots of things that intersect, right? So which makes the first chapter, which is the fourth category, which is the beginning of new ethos.
Mhm.
So the and as I'm doing it, I come upon this research for design. I come upon this design blog called La Baguette Magique, and I'm thinking, magic bread? Um, what is? But baguette in French can mean three different things, if not more. It's bread that was created essentially by the order of Napoleon,
Mhm.
and the baguette is also a magic
I didn't know that.
wand, and it's also a piece of wood that's kind of shaped like a wand. So they use it. The French are very lazy in their words. They use many other same things, but I'll just call it a baguette. And then they finally get up to the bread and they say, ah, it kind of looks like you make it into a baguette. Yeah. So it's that the magic bread, it's the magic wand. And that's one of my wife's two design blogs. She's written over 250,000 of, uh, words on design and lifestyle, and not just whimsy articles. These are cited, footnoted articles. So, so I started reading some of her stuff. I said, "Boy, she's a really good writer." Yeah. And then I looked down. She's written all these articles, and I said, "Gosh, she's a great writer. She's written all these articles." I looked down. She had 13 followers, and I said, "Nah, this woman should be writing feature articles for like the Atlantic, right? Or something of that nature." And she's being ignored. So I said, so I started commenting on her writing, and then she finally was thrilled to actually have somebody comment finally, and it was about an article on elephant she had been studying somewhere because she's a big animal rights activist as well,
Mhm.
Natalie, and and so she finally invited me to write a guest blog, which I accepted. And you can read it online. I'll post it tomorrow so everyone can read it,
Excellent.
uh, which is about serendipity because I'm talking about serendipitously meeting her to be able to be invited because I'm looking for design, right? And then come into here and then it kind of rolled into what it was, and we just took to each other and decided that was it, just for the short of it. And we stayed at the Hotel KUNTZ in Paris during our honeymoon, so to speak, pre-honeymoon. Hotel KUNTZ.
That's great. That is
The
serendipity.
history of it too. they couldn't believe I was a KUNTZ, and they were wondering whether I was related. And they so they gave us all the history on it and photocopied some of the history that they had back in their archives on the whole hotel and who owned it, and how long it's been in existence. And it was kind of an interesting thing. But anyway, that's how I met her, my wife, Natalie. She's a great woman.
That's wonderful, Rob. That is absolutely great. Um, Now you mentioned because I asked about playing and I understand you don't but have you run her through some
No,
classic adventures? No.
it was simple stuff.
Okay.
Simple stuff. I mean, I did DM over at Luca Comics and Games. I was over there DMing, and I DM'd when I was invited to convention in Athens, at
Hmm.
Athens Con. But I don't unless I get online, and I'd probably want to DM online and not so much play. I'll have some time at Arnicon to do some stuff. But I people want to play in my game, so it's kind of like I'm going to do the 3 sessions for uh, Into the Wild Blue Yonder, and then I'm going to probably DM El Raja K or Castle Greyhawk, you know, one of the two. So I got to bring around levels for both. So because people want to go, they want to play with me. I don't blame them, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah. I played a lot of games, Bill. Let me tell you, I played thousands of games just playtesting teams. So uh, easily 3 times a day for almost a year. Think about it.
I absolutely believe you, man. Um,
That's a lot of games.
that is a lot of games.
And then DMing, Jim and I used to run marathons, 20-hour marathons where we changed back and forth between me playing in his game and him playing in Greyhawk. You know, I'm going to describe some of those adventures someday in my adventure annals. So anyway,
Well, that actually merges nicely with this question from Chris. I have a few Chris's in the chat. I'm not sure which Chris this was at this point. I apologize. But Chris asks, was More Castle from Mordenkainen's Fantastic Adventure a one-off adventure for Gary, or did he or other players adventure there multiple times?
well, when I first created Castle Roger K, and this is a very complex issue
Okay.
because it has to do with, anyway, I'll start. When I first decided to create the castle was Roger K was to give Gary a chance to play. Then all of a sudden we had other players like Don Kay and Terry, my brother, taking their characters that started in Castle Greyhawk and coming into Castle Roger K. Now I described this at the Lake Geneva blog spot, which I don't update anymore, as the first living campaign. I put that link up there. I described that this is how finally Gary and I end up merging our campaigns, right? So when he went into, there was no more castle. Listen, it starts out as the Iron Golem adventure.
Hmm.
He enters the a crypt area that is essentially described in Mordenkainen's Fantastic Adventure. And he runs up against the Iron Golem and he defeats it finally. And he gains coral tablets, which are not in not in WG5. Because WG5 is rewritten and updated because the Iron Golem adventure was actually the annex for the Lost City of the Elders. This is why you see Lost City of the Elders in WG5. All right. Well, it
Okay.
was actually a direct annex. That coral tablet he had, uh, these coral tablets, which you don't hear about otherwise, are turned into the eight-pointed star and completely taken out because I'm guarding my IP. Because you remember, WG5 is owned by TSR. Moore Castle is owned by WotC. Now, you could trace this all the way back. This is them trying to then claim that they own Lost City of the Elders or Castle Roger K. So I wasn't about to do that, not being a dummy. So I changed all that, and this is why. But there is Gary's interference in this. Because when he creates World of Greyhawk, he puts a place to the southeast on the map, southeast of Greyhawk, near to the Bright Desert in that area. I think it's Ernst area, um, where it says it's Moore Castle, or if you look at it, it says Moab
Wow.
sometimes. Well, it says Moore or Moab. Gary was trying to get me to place my castle in his campaign, and I wasn't going to do it because I had already created my world from the top down, and I wasn't going to do it. It was on his march to try to get everyone in Frank Mentzer's game. There was even mention of putting Jim Ward's game in it and everything. And I, as much as I worked on the initial outdoor and stuff in the city, I had when he split and he went towards World Greyhawk, I was during World Calibre, so it kind of went two directions, right? The other matter for World Greyhawk, so that's a back him trying to backfill Moore Castle. So I named it Moore Castle, but it's not Castle Roger K.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that brings up another question from Kabuki, who is just she is asking all the questions tonight. She was wondering, is the Robilar in the TSR published Rogues Gallery accurate, or was it just guesswork? Just
No,
they said
I wrote it.
you wrote that one. Okay, well, it's accurate then.
And anybody who submitted a character wrote their own character for that.
Because see, I had heard, and I just absolutely put this to bed if it's wrong. I had heard that from Gary that his characters that were in Rogues Gallery were not. He was like he told me they did not have my character sheets to work from. Um, was that
Okay.
true or no?
It was Brian Bloom and whoever else was in charge of that contacted me and asked if I submit Robilar for publication. I said, yeah, sure. I was never paid for it. I signed no contract. And if Gary says he didn't do it, well, he didn't do it. But that's not what was going on with all those like I think Leeson's character was in there
Mm-hmm.
and some others. And
Tim Giardini.
they were doing it. So if Gary didn't do that in the same mode that we did, I don't know. He might have just said that for copyright reasons. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, that answers that question. So you guys, if you grab that Rogues Gallery, you get a used copy or get a print on demand from Drive-Thru, there you go. You have Robilar right in the palm of your hand. So
Actually, Robilar's been updated for a return of Robilar. So
excellent, excellent. So
as well as his dragons, as well as Otto, as well as all my, those people who are under his care and are related to him. So
well, I'll have to uh we'll have to compare notes before you have your cameo appearance in my Monday night game, and I'll make sure I did him justice, and hopefully won't get a noogie for how I introduced him. But we can talk about that another time. Let's see. Let me just zip back up through here and see what we've got. I don't want to have missed any questions from anyone. Um,
Game design.
Game design.
Everyone has
Um,
a lot of history. You know, it's the same thing when I was up on, I'm not criticizing. It's just people look at me and they, yeah, I've even blamed you.
you
Remember,
have.
when up on Dragon's Foot, you always used to ask me questions. What was the color of Robilar's
I,
brown horse or something?
yes, yes, Rob. Yes, I was a fanboy. You
And,
did.
but about maybe two times in my 10 years up on Dragon's Foot did anybody ask me about design. It's just amazing to me. It's kind of like coming up to an artist and saying, I love your painting, I love your painting, I love your painting. You hear that for 10 years, and then somebody says, by the way, how do you paint? You know, uh, I understand it. I understand it. Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Um, but go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, it's yeah, guys out there, queue them up. I'm getting to them as quick as I can. Well, let's talk a little bit. Okay, all right, fine. Let's talk about a design question. If I am asking the right question, how much of a hand did you have in the design of Lost Caverns of Sochcamp?
I designed the map.
You designed the map,
Yeah.
so none of the traps and
I mean,
encounters were
that's
yours, but it was just the map.
a level out of Castle Roger K. That's a Roger K map.
Oh, really? So what did Gary borrow that from you?
Where Drosna is at,
Yeah,
right? That's it's a redone version of level. I think it's level 8. Castle Roger K. Gary liked it so much he lifted it for WinterCon 5. Yeah.
I see. All right. Well, you know what? Alan Canning's putting it out all out there with a simple but complex question. And depending on how tired or hungry you are, we may not get this answered today slash tonight. How do you design adventures, Rob? As Alan wants to know.
The how-to question.
Yes.
Um, Let me tell you something. If you ever hear anybody tell you, I don't whoever's asking this question, that there's a how-to design, run away from them. Run far away because there is nothing of this sort. It is an odyssey each time you go about doing these things. It depends upon your proposition. I mean, in fact, I would expect anybody to shoot me between the eyes if I could answer this question. And I'll tell you why. Because it would prove that I'm a cyclical, mediocre, repeatable, imitatable designer not worth a shit. And and it really does get down to the fact that most of our design out there is repeatable nonsense. Now, this is not because I have any sort of inroad into what it is, but it's just the way it always has been. If you think about Robert McKee, who wrote the book Story on how to craft story, and he's an award-winning author and screenwriter, that he claims in the book that 90% of all things created on this earth is shit. And there's 10% that's good. And essentially every author, of course, when they endeavor to write don't believe that. They believe that it's just the cream rises to the top, and that, but unfortunately, if you look out tomorrow into a newspaper or on the internet, the market's telling you that it's all cream, and it's just not the case. Because if it was all cream, we'd all be rich, and we would have expanded out of our market so far that we would be replaceable in 1 second. And so you endeavor each time you put forth your proposition as a designer. You say, "I'm going to do this." You should not be saying, "I'm going to do what he's doing. I'm going to do what's been done." And the day you realize that you have to separate yourself from the crowd in order to do that, you're on your way to being a designer. Because designer is not about doing things. Just look at D&D. Look what Arneson did.
Mhm.
Blocked 2,000 years of game theory and game design and said, "No, I'm going to do it this way. This is what I'm going to do." And he organized a system that then no one recognized and couldn't even type. And you gave it to other game companies. They thought, "Ha ha ha, well, how stupid." Yeah, this is what it is. And that's design. Uh, I have nothing but great uh, kudos for both him and Gary as designers. But you remember, using D&D as the base, not to imitate, but to go beyond. Because I really believe that the door that especially Arneson, because he created system architecture, um, opened with the Gary as his co-author, and pushed it in the market and sold it and made it popular.
Mhm.
That not many people have walked beyond this door, and people are going to probably pop their eyes at that to me and say, "What are you talking about, KUNTZ? We have all these books, and we have all these systems and all these dice and all these mechanics and all this." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, you made it more complex or more complicated, or you made it bigger. You've extended it out from 1 to 4 to 1 to 100, but it doesn't matter because you're not outside the model." And I believe after 50 years in this industry that somebody needs to push beyond the model we're currently in because it's become a repetitive model. So now you know my point about where I think that the industry has gone. I think that we need more artisans and more Gygaxes and less imitation, right? We need more breakouts, just like they were. Let's. So my point is the baseline is creating the actual role playing game, right? That's the base. You get beyond it, or you can imitate it and thematically scale it, or put 10,000 words into it, or 100. How is it improving the matter? Is it pushing? Is it raising the bar? And these are questions you have to ask as a designer. Or if you don't care to ask them, probably not much of a designer. You can be called a designer. Maybe you're a person who creates templates and follows them. And so try to avoid how-tos, and more often in design answer how come, and you'll be doing okay.
Okay. Let me let me ask you a question to kind of kick off another question, Rob. Are you familiar with the works or more accurately actually the sort of mindset of the late Harlan Ellison?
Of who?
Harlan Ellison, the science fiction author.
And he also wrote TV plays as well.
Yes. Yes.
Harlan did, yeah. Harlan,
Um,
I believe, Harlan, and he also did his anthologies.
Mhm.
Right. What about them?
Well, so I've kind of had this mindset, and some people have agreed with it, some people have disagreed with it. It's one of those things that if it doesn't hold any water, then by all means, if somebody's got a good argument, they can disabuse me of it. So I'll ask you, Rob, here in front of all these lovely people, and they are lovely. I have the best looking audience of any 5 night a week classic RPG YouTube live stream, and I'll die on that hill. But do you think the RPG industry, and I don't old school, new school, whatever, do you think it's in need of a Harlan Ellison, of a firebrand who is utterly unafraid and will reach out
Dangerous visions.
dangerous visions, grab somebody by the lapels and shake them and say, and I can get away with an F bomb because I got a
You
very
know,
nice super chat.
this is, I consider myself quite a philosopher, actually.
Okay.
And philosophy has always been interesting to me, but not reading it so much as actually philosophizing on things. Uh, and I studied what I consider my own form of game philosophy for a while. And what you need is more innovation. And how you get that doesn't matter. All you have to do is like Massimo Vignelli, who's the great Italian modernist designer, who said a designer without a sense of history is worth nothing. And all you have to do is understand what that means, is that you need to study the history of design. If you're just picking up a book and you're saying, and you go through it and you say, I can do that, what are you doing? I mean, is this some sort of, we need more people. Now, here's where the quandary comes up.
Okay.
Gary Gygax and Arneson and myself promoted do it your own way. There is no there's no box to this. So you got a couple of options here. You can go and go completely gonzo. Think of D&D as a starting point, as a model that you start from, right? And think about on a scale of 0 to 100. 0 is by the book. By the book, for the book, and nothing but the book, so help me book. All right. You
Mhm.
do not change anything in it. That's 0 on the scale. 100 is the edge of chaos. Now, the changes are occurring so fast over here, you would need a computer to track them because the human couldn't actually play out how fast edge of chaos would be on the table in a tabletop game. You wouldn't have enough space. You wouldn't have enough paper. You couldn't do enough with it. So you come back along that line, you scale back, and then finally you say, I stop at some point along that iteration. And you're going to discover the next game. You're going to discover the next breakout. If you spend enough time interrogating what is being promoted and iterated in that sense. And you know what? This is exactly what Arneson did. This is why Dave Arneson's True Genius is a book. When I wrote it, it's mostly a study about how Arneson thought, because it becomes very interesting to me that how you think is where you go. It's not what you're starting with; it's where you're taking it. And and so do we need? So we need more. We need, as I said before, yeah, you could make it a corollary between Ellison, but I I could even go further. you know, because I don't think Ellison was the definitive of that.
Okay.
Uh, uh, well, I'm not going to go there because that go off in a whole section that the science fiction, fantasy stuff has been arguing about for years. Uh, but really, in our industry, we need the quandary is all the creators, including myself, said, make it what you want, right? So if it becomes a game where you're doing that and you're making a set of rules for that you think is worthwhile of something, well, you have an expression, you know. If it's if everyone's doing that, they're all on their own islands and they're their own designer, and they marked out their territories, and they're hoping people will join them. But once you get 1,000 of these games out there, the likelihood of that happening isn't very good. So what you have to do is maybe say, like I suggested when the OSR first started. And I got ridiculed. I got, I think, not only ridiculed, but attacked a little bit for this. And saying, with everyone that's created like all these 10 different OSR games, I said, which pretty much play similarly to each other, which uh, goes against what Gary suggested, that I don't believe campaigns playing similarly to each other is desirable. And that's a Lawrence Excursions quote. So why didn't everyone just pool their resources as designers and create something new? Why don't you push the boundaries and saying I can imitate them? Now you can nuance it all you want. What you come down to is with house rules. That's how you nuance it. So why don't, instead of recreating the wheel over, why don't you just put out a whole bunch of house rules book instead of recreating the game around the house rules? So, this whole thing about designing and stuff is kind of a mishmash, and it should be, because everyone's doing it the way they want to do it. But does that make, for an industry just at our level, that's going to be anything else but unhomogeneous? It's going to be kind of like back in the day, how designers viewed each other. They appreciated that we were all walking on the same plane together. Like, I'm on the same plane as you. There you are to the left. I'm over here on my own track, and we're walking on the same plane. And occasionally we'll come close to each other and we'll talk and say, hey, encourage each other along the same plane. But what happens as a designer is that you always separate and you're always pursuing your own thing. There is no such thing, in my point of view, as a community of designers, because everyone's got individual perspective. And they're saying to themselves, my perspective is better than his, or else I wouldn't be working on it and I'd be adopting his, right? So let's get past this point. Designers are focused on singular points. So I think that what this industry needs is more singularities. It needs less commonality, which was warned about as you start to become the same. And then you say, well, we're all the same. Are we all playing it the same way? No, we didn't do that back in the day. Gygax, Arneson, and myself were not in competition to see who could be the most fucking ordinary, you know?
Right.
This isn't it. It wasn't during design or play. We weren't in a contest to see who could be the most ordinary. Is that may be viewed differently by others as an insult or maybe some deprecation I'm feeling, but it's not. You want the raw facts of design. Design is an individual endeavor. You separate from the pack when you do it. You get out there. You do not claim you're doing it the same way. Like I said, when designers used to come in, Tony Morales or anybody from out of town, play testing the rules. If we told them that, hey, this plays a lot like Monopoly, the blood would run out of their face, like I told you earlier. Why? Oh my God. I'm not a very unique designer, am I? I recreated Monopoly. So that's the point about design. And how you get there, I don't know how you're going to do that because um, it's through endeavor. It's by somebody who one day says, "Listen, it's probably more of a moral dilemma because you just say I'm not going to produce the same stuff anymore, and you move on. You separate from the group, and you make your mark, and you define yourself. And that's the what Gygax did, and that's what Arneson does, and because of my awards and stuff, that's what I hope I do. You know, I define myself in a certain way and at different times. You know, but I do define myself. I don't look at other people's works and stuff. Once you master your own voice, go with it. Don't be looking to the right and left. You know, that's our Ellison was like that too.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so, which is, you know, I've stuck to that. I think from like a very grounded point of view, that that mindset is so needed in the hobby. Somebody, like I was saying, somebody needs to, just stand up and grab somebody by the lapels every now and again and say, no, fuck you. That's a bad idea.
Well,
Pay the damn writers and
you
do it
have
with quickness, Bob.
in design, you have to be able to take critique. If you make it all about yourself, you might as well just quit
Mhm.
because uh, this art is not about. It's not about you. It's about whether you're actually endeavoring enough with the art. You make it about you and become egotistical. You can't take critique. You're not going too far. You're not learning too much. You can't be a crybaby, mamby-pamby. Oh, he said that he didn't like my game. Well, listen, maybe he's wrong, maybe he's right. You know, there's another thing with this industry does not have is good reviews. Um, I criticized this for years, and part of the problem is that there's too many games, and other problem is that there's too many different games. And so if you're going to learn about all these systems in order to review them, it's not the same thing as literature. If somebody hands you a romance novel, it's fiction. Somebody hands you a science fiction novel, it's fiction. So, but in this industry, you have to play these games in order to review them. Are they doing that? You know, or are they passing them over to be able to review things that they're familiar with? And thus we're down the path of sameness again. So I think there's there's a voice to be made for more professional reviews. And that's a hard one because I wouldn't want to do it. There's too many thousands of games out there. You'd be pulling your head out and you're not going to be paid for it. Who's paying for that?
Oh,
So
yeah.
a lot of this stuff doesn't get in front of anybody. It doesn't get reviewed. So you have essentially the authors becoming the reviewer. And this is why they're pushing their games. And they should be. And they should be saying very loudly what a reviewer couldn't, or in time maybe we'll get to, or never get to. So, but then you have to distinguish between that and what's the hype and what's not, you know. And that all comes out when the rubber meets the road and whether the thing works or not. I think there should be more samples put out there by authors who want to succeed to show what the type of design work that they're doing. Yeah.
Right on. So, first of all, just a shout out to Butch Siebert here, who popped in and said that he wanted to thank you for your part in developing a game that has brought so much joy. So that was Butch Siebert there.
No, thank you.
Um,
My pleasure.
so, in your opinion, Rob, what is the best TTRPG outside of Dungeons and Dragons?
Now you're going to pick up on what was on X today, huh?
Hey, this is Kabuki again. She's full of questions tonight. You know,
Oh, I
she's
thought
like,
you were asking me that.
no, no, this I am serving the audience, Rob. So the bag of holding of questions seems to
Well,
be
I was
bottomless for Kabuki.
criticizing I thought you were the one asking the question
Oh, I have questions too.
rather than relaying it. Oh, I back out of that. So, what was the best role playing? You're asking the wrong person. I have played Call of Cthulhu twice. I played Gamma World. I played Rollmaster probably a couple of days. I can't keep up on them, you know. Um, the one that I enjoyed the most was On Guard. We played it around the office at TSR, you know,
Excellent.
from GDW. Why? Because it was so unlike D&D. Yeah, but it was a casual role playing game. Um, I these sort of things, these poll things, I never participate in anyway. It's all very subjective, just like standing in an art gallery and saying, "Oh, interesting," holding your finger under your chin and pretending to be. You're always going to get the fans that like it saying, "Oh yeah, it's this," and the other ones will coagulate over there, and but it's all rather, I don't think, meaningful. I think the meaningfulness of art and of design is that it should be appreciated for what it is, and if it is appreciated, you should be able to articulate why. And if you can't, then I'm not interested. And a poll will never accomplish that. A
Fair
good
enough.
review or a good statement by the artist will, but or a fair critic, uh, and the critics are it can be a dime a dozen as well. So uh, if you can articulate why the game is the best, I'd rather see a poll like that. And a lot of us couldn't answer that because we don't have as many words as the blue check people do.
Well, you just forward them to me, Rob, and I have a blue check, so I'll let you borrow as much of my screen as necessary.
I'll
Uh,
have I'll ask Ellen, he'll give it to me.
right on. So listen, we have been rolling on now for a couple hours. I know it's the wee hours of the morning there. Are you good to go? You think you're
Oh, no,
coming to a point?
as long as you see my head up, I'm doing fine.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Um, so let's talk a little bit about current events as far as far as gaming goes. You're you're not real happy, not real pleased with Wizards of the Coast right now. Is that something you want to discuss?
Yeah, I've already said what I have to say outside of the fact of the letter I'm writing them, which is turning into a memoir.
Good.
The No, I have nothing to say.
Okay.
It'd just be beating a horse, and it loses its effectiveness. It's kind of like, you know, one of these days one of these days, and you get into that little trap. I never believe in that. I always believe in rejecting the thing and getting it done and just shutting up about it.
Fair enough.
And and that's how I work. You know my feelings about it. It's not going to make it any more or less. by me expounding upon it. I just maybe start appearing to be the grumpy old man sitting on the porch or something. Ah, but I'm not that. And let me tell you, so I have a very clear mind. I've aged like a fine fucking wine here. Okay. I'm
Rob,
sick.
Rob, I haven't interrupted you all night, but I'm going to interrupt you to agree. Let me tell you guys something, okay? I met Rob face to face in 2004. I probably nattered him on Dragon's Foot before then, but I met you face to face in 2004. Guys, and I did probably before I bumped into you again on Twitter, what? Well, no, because there was Lake Geneva gaming conventions too, but there was easily more than a decade span those times. This guy, like, it's like we had just been talking like 5 minutes, not 15 years prior. So trust me when I back up what Rob says. The guy's got a mind like a steel trap. Don't doubt him. You do so at your own peril. So yeah.
I admit to my own fault. That's probably because I'm a Libra and it's the balance. And that's why I haven't fooled myself or attempted to fool anybody in this life. If you're hearing me, it's what's on my mind. It isn't contrived, it's whatever. I'm a straight shooter. Some people do not like that. I and and quite honestly, I don't give a shit. You know, I just don't. That's like Gygax said to me. Well, I think I told you this story when we were doing the test for your audience. Uh, he does an interview for Sylvan Publications or something. It used to be online called Sylvan something.
Mhm.
He does an interview, and this guy comes up there and starts hacking the shit out of him. Right? Well, anyway, it's a written interview, so Gary doesn't know he's being hacked on. So I wrote him an email. I said, I know Gary's. Yeah, I figured, but better tell him anyway. I said, just for your information, there's this guy who's now coattailing you on your interview you did for Sylvan in case you want to do something. And he said, Rob, I could give two pieces of coon shit what people think of me. And and I said, I know. I just thought I'd tell you anyway, because I knew what he was going to say to me. But I had to tell him, you know, just in
Mhm.
case, you know.
Of course.
But I just don't give a shit what people think about me. So, and that's a very good way of going armed into the den of Hasbro, because they are going to get uh, full barrels from me. And a lot of people don't know me. They think, oh, that's just bombast or this and that. Listen, I've been a marketing director. I've been a business sales manager. I used to open and close offices for a nationwide company. I know about sales. I know about how these fuckers think because I've been in their meetings. I've been in all their crazy meetings. Yeah. Well, if you spend 20 years like I did, you can be a millionaire too. I've heard it all from them. Right? I've closed Fortune 500 companies. I've talked to CEOs and the highest in charge. I'm gonna walk into Hasbro and they're gonna listen to me. You watch me. That's a brag. Hey, now prove it, Robillard. I'm going to. You watch.
Well,
I'm
I cannot wait to hear the tale of how Robillars laid siege to the evil castle on the west coast.
it's all rather blustery, isn't it? Sounds like a fucking tall tale from Robillard. Well, maybe I'll have another one. We'll see. I might get bashed out. Maybe I might get bashed out the door. I might get ignored. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
Well, everybody here is in your corner, Rob. 100%, man. I am
Oh,
for
I'm being
sure.
very professional with them. You can't go in there ranting and raving. I know how to deal with these people. It'll be fun. They're going to be quite amazed because I'm
Well,
referring to every one of the in the letter. I'm referring to every one of the board of directors by name in the introduction. So it's going to be fun. Well, let's go on. Let's go on some
So
other direction.
let's go on. Um, let's see. Who is the better DM, Gary or Jim?
You know, Jim Ward or Gary?
Yeah, or you?
And, you know, what is with all these questions about who's the best, what's the best? You know, I feel like I'm at a cheerleading contest or something for the Charlotte Hornets about to go way up the basketball.
Come on,
Uh,
man. I had to bring some
best,
fanboyism out tonight.
best. It, I just told you that Gary lost his nerve as a DM one time and and broke neutrality and destroyed my castle. Now, if you were to put that in proper perspective today, that's a big no-no, right? But Gygax doesn't gets away with it. Why? Because he was very good, right? And he was also referred to by Lynn Carter, which we all should be familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
as Gygax the Gregarious. And so, who's the best? Whoever's DMing the best at the time. That's who's the best.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But if you want my personal opinion, I don't know. I've probably never been DM. I mean, I think it's unfair to leave Arneson out of it too, because Arneson was my first DM.
Sure.
Uh, so Arneson had us running scared. You know, read the game that changed everything. I detail the monsters we run into, the encounters we run into in Castle Blackmore. First, it's a troll where we get the wish sword from. Then we walk into this room where this magic user is already appearing out of the shadows, moving his hands and uttering strange words. This is how Dave had us rooted. And I'm looking at McGarry on my right, and McGarry has got fear in his eye. Now, you do not get fear in your eyes playing in a game in one session. This has come on a long time of playing in Dave's game and the respect that that he had for Arneson, that he would kill you. And there were signs. And one of them was a guy coming forward going, la, 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 and moving his
Waving his hands around.
head. It was a pretty good sign we were just about to get blasted. So we all run, except my brother.
Oh boy.
Being the cantankerous person that he's always been, I'm going to attack this guy, this sorcerer. So he goes up there and he gets the fireball right in the face. Dave rolls all the dice behind the screen, looks at his character sheet, says, "You're dead." So, so that was the first death. We're running, and Dave says, "You hear footsteps behind you." This this guy has also called some other of his servants who come out of the back and are out chasing us up the stairs through Castle Blackmore, and I kept on looking at McGarry, and he's got nothing but fear in his face. He says, "We need to get out of the castle because this guy's going to probably kill us." And then when he got out of the castle, he says, "Just to make sure this guy isn't following us into the village, let's get the horses at the stable and go in the outdoor." And that's what started our outdoor adventure. That was palpable fear from a veteran player. So who's the better one? No, I didn't play under day but twice that I respected both times. And it's kind of an unfair loaded question because I played more so under Gary. And I was a student. We designed stuff together. So I'd probably give the nod to Gary. But I really would say that everyone can have their moments as DMs. Jim had his,
Mhm.
I had mine. Ernie claims, Ernie Gygax claims I'm the best DM outside of his father. I don't know. It's perceptions of people, you know.
Right.
That's that. Anyway, that's what I had to say.
Well, there you go. So I have to relate a story. I actually there was a fellow that used to game with us down here a number of years ago. But in the early 2000s, Dave Arneson lived proximate to me, and
Oh,
this fellow
really?
this fellow who
Fort Lauderdale? I mean, not Fort Lauderdale. You're close to.
Orlando actually.
Excuse me.
Yeah. But I met Dave at a few historical wargaming cons down here. But this fellow who actually played in Dave's weekly D&D game um, said that very similar situation to what you're talking about. Fellow comes out of a hall, starts waving his hands at the party as they're coming up a corridor, and he says you see like sparks of lightning start to arc from his fingers, and he'd go around the table and say, uh, what do you do? He'd ask everybody what they're doing and give them just a few seconds to answer, and if they didn't, he would say, "Well, you're just standing there dumb. What are you doing?" And he got to my friend and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I make a saving throw versus spells." And he said, Arneson just kind of stopped and gave him the stink eye and said, "What do you do to save versus spells?" And he said, "I throw myself onto the floor so the lightning passes above me." And he said, Dave said, "Wrong. You take throws a bunch of dice."
Yeah,
That's my that's
I
my
just
adjacent Arneson
say
story.
use that because that's what I use the origins too. For because I had 18 adventure for barrier peaks, and so and it's a tournament. So I was like, okay. I described the situation and I said, okay, what are you doing? I was throwing party reaction. There's no way I'm going to throw 18 individual reaction die roll and everyone rolling off, or going the same. So I was going, what do you want to do? And I would count the 1001, 1002, 1003. And if they had to say anything, you don't do anything. Now, this set up a pattern of people speeding up what they were going to do instead of just waiting like to do today, and even having discussions, from what I understand, that take place for 5 minutes before you make up your decision upon some of these modern day games I've heard go on forever. Well, let me check this in the book and check my feet and do this and do that. No, pressure cooker. This is what maintains a sense of uncertainty in the game. And it's very overlooked because we tend to say, well, we have to be fair. There is no fairness in combat. You know, you come in and what are you doing? 1001, 1002, 1003. You're not going to do anything. You're standing there. That really gets people moving. And it got my party moving. And then also, you have to watch out with that when you're doing that. And I cover this in the house. So I'm going to give away a little bit. That what Gary and I used to talk about was the walkie-talkie syndrome. That people, as they now call it now, metagaming,
Yeah.
and I really dislike that term, so I never use it. It's
Okay.
just what it is just it's just omniscient viewing. And I'd rather stay in literary instead of go off in some stupid metagaming thing. Uh, but really it is having omniscient views. And you realize that everyone does have omniscient views because you get to hear what the other person's doing. So once I got to somebody in the line and I say, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to move to the side and start preparing to do this." And then you go to the next person. You say, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, kind of I'm following what that guy what he's doing." I said, "You don't know what he's doing, so you're not doing anything." See, the point is that everyone should be reacting at the same time,
Mhm.
but they're not. So in the game sense, you have to bring it back to that, or else they're going to have omniscient viewing. And I think that's a lot of information gets given away in that time. I'm very particular about that in my games. So it's not that I'm trying to penalize people because I think a lot of people get as I've watched a lot of convention games, a lot of soft DMing going. Now I understand convention games are convention games. Everyone's just trying to have fun and get by or whatever. But I am particular on that, and Gary was too, and obviously so was Arneson, as he was pressure cooker. So that was interesting. I didn't know that Dave did that. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you're quite welcome. Let's say, I, I apologize for this. Graph Paper Architect has like asked like 4 times in a row. Um, who brought snacks to the D&D game first?
Huh?
Graph Paper Architect wanted to know who brought snacks to the D&D game first.
Who
I think he
bought
hasn't had dinner.
who bought what?
Snacks,
Oh,
you know.
snacks. Who brought snacks over?
Yeah, who brought snacks over the first time?
I I have no clue.
All right.
I'm playing at Gary's house, so if we
Well, there you go. Uh,
we used to order a lot of next door Bob pizza when we were playing at my house. So
you're
best yeah.
making me hungry. Let's see. Uh, Campaigns and Conquest wants to know what was the design philosophy around don't give up the ship. Well, there you go, a design question for you.
Well, I don't know since I wasn't the designer. Um, and two of the designers are dead. The other one living is Mike Carr. And because it was Arneson and Gygax at first, then when they redid it for Lowry, updating the article, the installment from the IW magazine, then Mike Carr came on and consolidated, add some things. In fact, he still adjudicates these games. From my understanding, he adjudicated one at Gary Con, often does. And but I can't tell you outside of the general design philosophy is to engage in ship to ship combat. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Don't give up the ship. I mean, it's combat in the time of sail, and and then boarding, I guess, was handled as well. But it's pretty straightforward for a miniatures war game.
Okay. Okay. Kabuki again with another question here. How much of Arneson's game was written down and how much was in his head, or he just kind of riffed as he went?
Say this again.
How much of Dave Arneson's game was written down and how much did he just keep in his head?
That is a question best asked. Now, I can answer in part.
Okay.
Uh, his type notes that Gary requested, what he had, were somewhere between 16 and 18 pages typed. Now, it doesn't mean that those were everything that was consonant with his campaign, because as we know, Arneson dumped a whole bunch of notes and other manuscripts on, well, there was one manuscript that was not included in the D&D game. That was the aerial rules, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
for aerial combat. And of course, for Blackmore Supplement #2, there were additional notes and papers. This discussion has come up recently up on X.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you something. This allows me to answer another question.
Okay.
I think it's a good segue for it. First of all, um, most of these games that we played with these people, if you believe that Len Lakofka would bring up a diplomacy game or a diplomacy variant, which he was known to do, because he was big diplomacy fan, ran liaisons, dangerous liaisons. Um, and you think that everyone back in that day had these rules all neatly typed out and put before you in some sort of binder form. It's not how it happened. Um, even with Parent, started with 4 pages of chainmail, and then they worked on it as they were going along. Written notes first that we were using to play chainmail. Then Gary would say, "Well, uh, Gary would let me tell you about chainmail from Parent's 4 pages typed." Gary then started testing out the rules for it. And those were they were inside his head, or they were in note cards or paper. And once he saw that the rule worked, then he went and typed it. All right. So you have a corollary there in how you're designing games. And you had a whole bunch of people saying how much is in his head and how much is on paper. It doesn't matter. And you might want to also understand something here. This is an unusual game. And I stand by me saying that is a fourth category of games. It's a conceptual game. This Arneson had played it for a year and a half and was still in the midst of iterating. And why? Because it's a game of infinite possibilities. Do you believe that Arneson was going to rule the infinite possibilities, or did he obviously understand, just like we did when Gary reached the end of the manuscript, saying, we have to stop here. This is good enough for what these people need to get the gist of what's going on. The rest of it's going to have to come.
Mm-hmm.
So Arneson was playing it, had the rules in his heads, because the system almost demanded as much. There was no way of ruling everything, especially with, I'd like to also point out that at its height, the MMSA had literally 2 to 3 times more members than we did as the LGTSA, about two and a half. It's a very large group of players up there. I think people misunderstand because, we're in Lake Geneva. Yeah, it's 5,000 people, and we got some people coming up from Rockford and stuff in Chicago or down from Milwaukee. But the group in Lake Geneva had to grow over time to get up to around 10 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
By the time that Arneson is coming down, he's got 20 people, 30 people who played in his game. Right? So he's dealing with all these people asking him, and he also understand Arneson was running a campaign as well. He had people running around controlling armies as well as going on adventures. So it isn't like with us, when we started D&D, we were just playing the adventure. Like I said, first level punk, right?
Mhm.
First level, I'm going to be a hero, you know? So only when we reached the upper levels did we then start getting the campaign play. So Arneson was controlling a whole massive campaign structure with people with their own castles and their own orders and what they were doing, as well as putting people into the castle and going through all their adventures and the wars and all this stuff. Very complex, very involved. Arneson was a fast thinker. He's one of the fastest thinkers I've ever run into. And 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 so I would imagine him using all that, his space inside his brain, very well. He was able to put it down and describe it to Gary, so Gary could actually write up an iteration of it called Dungeons and Dragons. So I don't know the exact amount, but really in the end, it doesn't really matter because most of the game designers are doing it like that with even simpler games, not one as complex as an RPG.
That tracks. That definitely tracks. So when you're not being a gadfly on X and provoking us all to think a little bit deeper about being elves on graph paper, what do you do? How do you unwind these days? What is a pastime maybe folks don't know about Robilar that you enjoy?
What is it? What do I do for enjoyment?
Yeah, what do you do to unwind?
Oh, I go on walks with my wife or go swimming or something like that. Quite honestly, I'm going to be quite admit here. I uh, Rob Kuntz is a wound tight person. Uh, I have a lot of nervous energy.
Mhm.
I'm sometimes an insomniac, and I don't sleep. And sometimes I go to bed and I start thinking about something and I can't get back to sleep, so I get up. Uh, I am wound very tight, and this is just the way I am. So I really my relaxation is more dependent upon what my wife wants to do. Uh, Otherwise, I have begged God to allow me to find a switch for my mind and turn it off, but it's not working. So I just keep on thinking, and lest you think me insane, but I'm going to say it anyway. I believe that at some point in the past, my subconscious and my conscious merged, and that's just the way it is. My mind won't shut off. So I'm best when I'm thinking. I'm best when I'm putting my thoughts down. I am a thinker. I'm constantly thinking, and I wish I could shut my mind off. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, it does, sir. It does.
Have a fun thing.
Let's see. Campaigns and Conquest has a couple of questions. Um, how do you feel about not using rules and just adjudicating the game world? And do you see a drawback to that?
You mean just go blank, go from scratch, and make it up as you go along? Is that the way he's asking?
Sure, I think that's the context, and CNC, if that's not the case, let me know in the chat. But I think that's where he's going, Rob. So what do you
That's
think about
not it.
that approach?
In fact, I recommend everyone do that. Why? Because, um, in fact, it kind of answers this question, but from a different perspective during a 2011 interview. It just shows you my memory's still doing well. And why? Why do we wish to create things on the fly because it's part of story crafting and instead of story repeating. See, a module is a script. And if you read the script, it's going to be exactly the same each and every fucking time, just like a book.
Mhm.
And everyone can do that. You can give a module to a guy standing on the street corner who's never played D&D and say, "Will you read this?" No, yeah. He may not understand all of it, but he'll read it. Um, Now, instead of being a story repeater, learn to be a story crafter. And this is what you're going to learn by doing it on the fly, just like Gary and I did. Right? I can make up a story right now. I can have you go in. I don't need any dice. I don't need anything. I'll take you on an adventure right now. I can make it up right now. In fact, I can make up a board game right now. But you have to be able to make up a story, whether you're thinking about it and saying I'm plotting it and writing it down, or what. But if you can do it at that level, all right, you become a master. You are now a master. You are no longer at the crossroads of story repeater and story crafter. You move beyond it, and and they all have their place, just like a movie has its place to be able to entertain us because it's a script, and the books have it. But remember, you're the master. You're the master of the tale. You're also you're building your world as you're having your people share in it, and they're experiencing it as they help develop your world. They're part of the particles of your world. They're part of the imaginary constructs taking place in your world and going through it. So if you can master story by, like Gygax and I did, by just taking one element and when running with it, saying people would come into a room in our castle, it says 5 orcs. It's not much, is it?
Mhm.
Uh, by the time it's through, though, you have a story. But so it depends which way you go with the element. What do you want to make it? It's the same choice a writer has to make. I want to put an orc at this point of the story. Well, what's it going to be doing? You're just doing it in real time. That's what it is. And if you can create a story in real time, you're a master.
Excellent.
Everyone should practice that. It's only improve your DMing.
I try to. I honestly try to. One of the best compliments, unintentional compliments I ever got was from a player of mine who we were playing. I used the World of Greyhawk setting. I made it my own, of course, but we were playing, and after the game, we were just kind of bantering, and I said, "So, what'd you think tonight, Aurora?" And she said, "Well, it was a lot of fun, but you know, these classic modules are really awesome." And you do a great job with them, but when are we going to get something that you've just created? And Rob, I had to laugh because I hadn't been running a module, and I had just been going off ideas off the top of my head as I took the party through this multi-story dungeon, my own Castle Greyhawk, if you will. So I took that as a great compliment that she thought I was working for prepared notes.
Well, that's
So
people don't know after a while.
yeah. So
One of
seek
the
to
hard.
uh seek to make people think you have it all prepared and under control at all times, I guess is the lesson out of that.
Well,
Uh,
it's not really fake it until you make it. It's actual story crafting. Listen, people have got to understand that it's no different than what you do in creating a module. You choose where, when, how, what, and why, right? You just do it in real time. You're not going to write it down. But really, what an adventure crafter does is say, well, the five arcs going to be here and they're going to be like this and they're going to say this and maybe do that. Well, what's the difference? I'm just telling you what's going on. I didn't put it on paper and make it set in stone as a script. I can actually work with these elements. But if they're on paper, they have to be dealt with as is.
Mhm.
So, and some people might argue with me about this and saying, Rob, you're committing a writer suicide, but it's the truth. Open forum type of adventures like this are superior, in my view, to published adventures. And the reason being is that you can, I don't care how fluffy or whatever they are in the published adventure. It is a script that ends when it's finished. Um, but here with elements, as I discussed in New Ethos and Game Design, they are not finished. They do not have definition points that are totally defined. You can work with them. You can continue making the story. And Gary and I used to do that. We used to twist the story in directions. This is your world. Make your story. It's no different than putting this story down in print and saying this is the way it's going to play. You know,
Mhm.
it really isn't. They're both godlike decisions.
So let's see. Campaigns and Conquest also had a follow-up question. I think it's a little more nuts and bolts, but have you ever used any computer software or anything like that to assist you in running games?
Um, is there such a stuff that can be used to assist you in running games from a computer?
Well, I guess that answers the question, but to respond to your answer, yes, there are tools uh for cooking up stuff on the fly or keeping track of things at the table and so on. And uh I've
I'm
used
just, I'm a pencil and paper man.
I gotcha. I gotcha. Well, so let's see. I don't want to have missed anybody's questions here. So if anyone else has got any, I I want to save some up for another chat because I hopefully after that we'll find out what was in the letter you're gonna the manifesto you're gonna deliver to Wizards of the Coast. I want to know about that after that happens.
I'll probably, I said I'd photograph the mailing going off and maybe the cover letter or something like that. It's going to become too long to post on X. Um, but after a while, I'm going to let it out in the public, especially if I don't get any action on
Good, good. I want to know all about it, but like you said, it'll happen when it happens.
it.
Um, let's see. Is there anything else, Rob? Is there anything we haven't touched on that the question unasked that you would like to address? You
I don't
have the
know.
time. Okay.
I could go more on design, or I could do something like that, and you go off every different directions. If you run out of questions, then you know I'm not going to start quizzing myself.
Okay. Um, well, once again, my comments cheerleader Kabuki comes to the rescue. What is next for you?
Immediately, well, I'm going to be attending Arnicon.
Excellent.
Um, I have an announcement coming at the end of the year about something I'm doing, which should be pretty much ready to go by then. And and we're with the help of my wife, who does the layout, Natalie does the layout. We were having a little bit of trouble with drive-through or RPG.
Hmm.
Want to get back to print products.
Good.
And but now Alexander Macros and had helped us with his layout person, Mucky Blood Design guy, and really nice guy from the UK, and he's helped my wife out to understand this whole crazy setup on drive-through. So, and it is pretty crazy. And so we're going back to print products pretty soon, but not before I get out a couple more PDFs as my last PDFs probably. I mean, at least that, but we are going back to print very soon. And then at the end of the year, I have a big announcement coming up as kind of a surprise. I'm not going to say any more about it. So, but in between, I'm going to, in October, I'll be at Arnicon. And
Well,
I have to complete everything I set off to do. Uh, memoirs. I got a documentary that's kind of on hold because they're trying to find funding for it.
mhm.
And um, a screenplay I'd like to write. Um, a book, a rogues gallery of the election Eva players. I have so many things. It's just amazing. I have to select which ones to do because they're all pretty good from my point of view, because I'm very self-critical. And in fact, one of them is about all the adventures that were taken into the castles, and like Roblar and Gary Mordenkainen and Gary's playing and so forth, me DMing him and him DMing me. So I want to illustrate those stories and put in historical perspectives and timelines of when those adventures happened. That's a book of adventures. And so there's a lot of things. A lot of things. Hopefully, I can get to most of them that I think are important. Because
Well,
I have I'm picking and choosing now. I'm approaching 69 years of age. You know, so I'm kind of having to pick what I think are the creme of the creme. Yeah.
I understand. I understand. So let's see. Adam Dravian asks, is there any particular aspect about early D&D that you wish more people understood?
Yes. The problem, and let's approach it like this, because I addressed this in New Ethos and Game Design. The problem with this new concept that Arneson created, revealed to us, and we're sitting there essentially doing the same thing Arneson did, right? Which was iterate a set of rules, right? I believe Gary wanted to do that so he could understand how this whole thing worked. But he also chose to change the mechanics. He didn't prefer Arneson's mechanics, he preferred his own. But the system structures is still Arneson's. So he goes and he gets all this stuff done, and we go through the pay test and the play test, and the rules are made in the backwash of the play test. You don't it's done inverted with Gray or with D&D. Most of these games, you at least have a great portion of the rules finished before you actually start playing the damn thing. Well, there was only 8 pages of rules when we started out, 8 to 10. And the rest of the rules were created in the backwash of the playtest. So they get up to 3 volumes, as you know, and they're published. And Gary said, this is enough, for them to understand this. Now, there's 3 key points in OD&D, what I call the milestone points. The forward, the introduction, and the afterward. And in all 3 of those places, you see a kind of, if you read them, all those quotes in there, why have us do any more of your imagining for you? That's the
Mhm.
afterword, right?
I remember it well.
And so if you read all these things and you separate them out and you put them into next to each other and you look at them, they have some sort of philosophic unity going, right? And what's missing from OD&D are the examples of that philosophical unity. And this is what was missing. It was kind of an exhortation, which appeared to be some sort of philosophical unity, but it was not explained beyond that. It was left for everyone to figure out on their own. If there was anything I would change, it would be that. If I had a choice to go back, and this is what I believe that this whole thing needs to be stated emphatically, because it is a philosophy that works. It is a philosophy because it is a new system. It has its own language. It has its own barriers. It has the ability to recreate itself. How do you explain that? All right. What is the language for this? This is new system language because it is a new system. And you cannot have a new system without having a new game attached to it, or a new game category. They're not mutually exclusive. So this is what I would do, is define the philosophy, and it's what I'm doing with New Ethos and Game Design. And I start that off with the fourth category is the first chapter, which sets the premise and makes the statement of what it is, and then I go on from there. And hopefully I want to finish that as well. That's 120,000 words I have written on it, and all it really needs is editing and reorganizing. And it's finished.
Well, I look forward to reading it all. You have put me on to a lot of new ways of thinking, quite frankly, that I've never really looked at the game through this prism before, Rob. And
Uh,
I'm not blowing sunshine, man. This is fascinating stuff to me.
what is it that I put you onto? The greatest thing about this game, Arneson intuitively brought this into existence because he didn't describe the philosophy. He couldn't
Mhm.
even, the Minnesota group um, didn't even type it, right? Then it got to us. Gary says it's a fourth category, but he's not describing the philosophy. He gets near it in the you know forward introduction afterward, but he doesn't describe it. So I'm describing it. And the only way to do that is to describe what it is. That it's a new system. That's the only way you can describe this thing. This thing does not have the same language as game theory languages because it's open. Well, game theory is most about closed systems. And this is an open system. It's going to have different languages. And as opposed to a closed, because it's not a repeatable thing that you then play and dispose of. It's continuous, you know. So I appreciate you at least listening to this insane person.
Well, I listen to my own streams from time to time, Rob, so I'm used to listening to a crazy person. We're gonna wrap it up, but with one final question,
All right.
which Mage's Musing says this is the only relevant question that remains. 3d6 down the line or 4d6 drop the lowest, arrange as desired.
Mostly Gary and I did the second.
Well, there you go. I think that's the best way to go too.
Because
Uh,
we didn't want people crippled in the game, you know, with their immediate characters. It was already too tough the way he was making it. with, you're a weak six-sided, you get a six-sided die in OD&D until I change it for Greyhawk with the dice. But it was already iffy if you're gonna survive, you know. Need a little extra. Gary and I didn't really try to kill people. People think we're nasty judges or something, and or killer judges. No, uh, but they tended to walk into things that got themselves killed. That's the way it was. And sometimes we'd warn them. We'd warn them, and they still go. I mean, not like give it away kind of warning. If you go down there, you're gonna die. We gave them these hints and stuff that things weren't, exactly this. You're not in Kansas anymore. You know, and they'd ignore it like a lot of parties do. And they suffered the consequences. But we didn't go our way to try to kill him. Except Gary tried to kill me when I was Robolar and I sacked the Temple of Elemental Evil. And that's why I abandoned my castle because I knew it was going to kill me.
Well, there you go. Um, Rob, you're going to come back, right? We're going to have you on the show again.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Good, good. I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for some fantastic questions tonight. Big thanks to Michael Dale for that $50 super. I appreciate that, brother. It literally helps keep the lights on. Rob, wow, what can I say? It was absolutely amazing and educational and fun having you here. I'm sure we'll yell at each other on Twitter/X, whatever you want to say, here from now till the cows come home. I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to be playing a little bit of Gamma World on live stream for y'all's entertainment. So I hope you'll check that out. And then Saturday, I have a big, you might even want to tune into it, Rob. Saturday night, it's Gary's birthday. I have a big announcement Saturday night.
That's
So
a,
you guys should you guys should
what's the big announcement? Give me one word hint.
um I'll give you three, Rob. Paying it forward.
Pay
Paying
it,
it for I am paying it forward. But
pay it
that
for.
you'll have to tune in to find out more about that.
Yeah,
So I think it's about high time we roll those credits, and I give out my nightly warning as you people file out to your cars and hold your loved ones close and return to your homes and domiciles. Whatever you do, please, please, please keep your eyes peeled for those deadly owl bears. Peace. Good night. Love you all.